Do you know that a staggering 73% of all space accidents erupt in the first 2 harrowing, pulse-pounding minutes of flight, when the raw, untamed power of liftoff collides with the fragile, razor-thin boundary between our familiar, nurturing Earth and the cold, unforgiving void of space that hungers for any mistake? On October 11, 2018, 2 extraordinarily courageous men learned this bone-chilling, heart-stopping statistic in the most visceral, soul-searing way imaginable, as they hurtled through the thinning atmosphere at an altitude of 50 kilometers, where the air grows so scarce and hostile that it clings desperately to life for only a handful of frantic, gasping seconds before the merciless vacuum of the cosmos claims everything in its icy, relentless grip, leaving no room for error, no second chances, and no forgiveness for human frailty. It seemed like just another crisp, unassuming autumn morning at the historic Baikonur Cosmodrome, a vast expanse of concrete and steel steeped in decades of human ambition, triumph, and occasional heartbreaking failure, where the air hummed with the quiet tension of routine preparations, the faint scent of fuel lingering like a promise of adventure, and the distant echoes of past launches whispering tales of glory and peril. But within 2 heart-pounding, adrenaline-soaked minutes after the thunderous ignition that shook the ground like an earthquake of human will and determination, this seemingly ordinary day would carve itself indelibly into the annals of space exploration history as one of the most terrifying, soul-shaking ordeals ever recorded, a raw, unflinching reminder of how perilously close we dance to disaster when we dare to challenge the stars, evoking a profound sense of vulnerability that lingers long after the flames die out and the dust settles. Could you even begin to fathom the sheer terror of surviving such a cataclysm when your colossal 300-ton home, a marvel of intricate engineering and human ingenuity turned into a ticking time bomb of explosive fury, detonates beneath you in the freezing, desolate expanse of the stratosphere, shredding your dreams of cosmic discovery into a whirlwind of fire, twisted metal, and sheer, gut-wrenching panic that grips your soul with unrelenting fear, forcing you to confront the fragility of existence in its most brutal, unforgiving form? The mere thought sends chills racing down the spine, evoking a deep, gut-wrenching empathy for those who stare into the abyss of the unknown, and an overwhelming respect for the indomitable human spirit that refuses to yield even in the face of oblivion's cold embrace. A spirit that rises from the ashes stronger, wiser, and more determined. Alexei Ovchinin, the steadfast and unflinching commander, 47 years old, a battle-hardened test pilot whose veins coursed with the adrenaline of high-stakes aviation, and whose eyes held the quiet wisdom of someone who had stared down danger countless times, with one grueling spaceflight already etched deeply into the tapestry of his life's experiences, and a devoted father whose heart ached with tender love for his 2 precious children waiting anxiously back home, their innocent smiles, playful laughter, and trusting eyes probably flashing through his mind like beacons of warmth and motivation amid the sterile pre-launch tension, reminding him of the profound personal stakes beyond the mission's scientific goals. Nick Hague, the resolute and determined American astronaut, 43 years old, a decorated U.S. Air Force lieutenant colonel stepping boldly into the unknown for his very first space mission, with 3 young children of his own yearning desperately for his safe return, their small arms wrapped around him in tearful, heart-wrenching goodbyes that tugged at his soul with the weight of unspoken fears and the silent plea to come back whole and unharmed. 2 exemplary professionals, 2 loving fathers bound by an unbreakable sense of duty, camaraderie, and the shared dream of touching the infinite expanse of the stars. Yet in mere heart-stopping minutes, they would be thrust violently into a life-or-death crucible where all their years of rigorous, sweat-drenched training would clash head-on against the merciless, unyielding laws of physics, testing the very limits of human endurance, resilience, and willpower in ways that would haunt their dreams, stir profound emotions of raw terror, unbreakable resolve, and the aching longing for the warmth of home that could have been lost forever in a blaze of catastrophe, leaving an indelible mark on their souls and inspiring generations to come with their story of survival. The launch pad at Baikonur stood stark and imposing against the vast, windswept Kazakh steppe, a landscape of endless, golden horizons under a clear sky that had witnessed countless triumphs and tragedies in humanity's relentless quest for the cosmos, where the air crackled with anticipation and the faint, acrid scent of rocket fuel hung heavy like a promise of adventure or impending doom. The Soyuz rocket, a gleaming white colossus towering an awe-inspiring 50 meters high, its sleek, cylindrical form packed to the brim with 700 tons of highly volatile explosive fuel, held within its belly the raw, explosive power to propel fragile human bodies beyond the pull of gravity to the infinite expanse of orbit or, in a split second of catastrophic failure, unleash a cataclysmic inferno capable of obliterating everything in a blinding, earth-shaking flash of destruction that would echo through the souls of survivors, witnesses, and the world at large with a profound sense of loss, fragility, and the humbling limits of technology. Up in the cramped, high-tech capsule perched precariously at the top like a crown on a giant's head, Afshanin and Haig sat strapped into their form-fitting seats, hearts pounding beneath their bulky, life-sustaining spacesuits, the weight of the world, and the tender hopes of their families, pressing down on them like an invisible, suffocating force that amplified every pre-launch butterfly in their stomachs, every fleeting doubt that whispered in the back of their minds about what could go wrong in the vast unknown. Afshanin's pulse held steady at 72 beats per minute, a calm facade meticulously cultivated through years of high-stakes simulations that mimicked every conceivable disaster. Yet beneath it lurked the undercurrent of adrenaline-fueled anxiety that every cosmonaut feels in those final, nerve-wracking moments before ignition. The quiet fear of the unknown, the silent prayer for safety and success, the emotional tug of leaving loved ones behind in a world that suddenly feels so fragile, distant, and irreplaceable, evoking a deep sense of longing and responsibility that weighed heavily on his chest. Key to start came the authoritative command from Mission Control, crackling through the speakers with a sense of irrevocable finality that sent a subtle shiver down the spine, marking the point of no return where dreams met reality in a blaze of fire and force, the moment when all preparation culminated in action. Key to start confirmed, Afshanin replied, his voice steady and professional but laced with the subtle tension of a man who knew the razor-thin margins between glorious success and utter catastrophe all too intimately, his mind flashing briefly to his children's faces one last time, their innocent trust fueling his resolve amid the rising hum of systems coming alive. Among the 147 meticulously memorized emergency procedures they had drilled into their minds over years of grueling, exhaustive preparation scenarios that covered everything from minor technical glitches that could be fixed with a flip of a switch to full-blown, life-threatening disasters that demanded split-second decisions, there was no exact, step-by-step script for the nightmare that would unfold in precisely 118 agonizing, eternity-stretching seconds, a moment that would transform a routine launch into utter, heart-stopping chaos, evoking a surge of panic, desperation, and the desperate fight for survival that grips the soul with icy, unrelenting fingers, leaving scars that time can never fully erase, and stirring emotions of profound fear, resilience, and the raw human will to live against all odds, a will that defines us as a species. Liftoff, in a deafening symphony of raw power and engineering marvel that reverberated through the bones and soul like a primal roar. 20 engines ignited simultaneously with a thunderous boom that shook the ground like an enraged beast awakening from slumber. 800 tons of thrust battling ferociously against 300 tons of mass, in a titanic struggle that symbolized humanity's unyielding defiance of gravity's chains and the limits of our terrestrial existence. Afshanin felt the G-forces slam him back into his seat with brutal, unrelenting intensity, the weight equivalent to 200 kilograms crushing his chest like an invisible anvil forged from the forces of nature itself, making every breath a labored, painful gasp as if the rocket demanded a personal tribute from his body and spirit in exchange for the privilege of flight, the sensation evoking a mix of awe and vulnerability that heightened the emotional stakes. The Earth fell away rapidly through the tiny porthole, a dizzying, heart-wrenching blur of shrinking landscape, fields, rivers, and cities reducing to abstract patterns, that filled him with an intoxicating mix of exhilaration and profound vulnerability. The sheer thrill of ascent tempered by the sobering knowledge that one tiny misstep, one unforeseen failure in the complex web of machinery and calculations, could end it all in a heartbeat, snuffing out lives, dreams, and futures in an instant of fiery oblivion that would leave families shattered, colleagues mourning, and the world reflecting on the costs of exploration. Altitude 5 kilometers, 10, 20. he reported methodically, his voice strained under the mounting pressure that pressed on his body like the hand of fate itself. Each word an anchor to normalcy amid the rising storm of forces, his mind racing with the emotional undercurrent of responsibility to his crew, his family, and his country. Normal mode confirmed, he added, but even as he spoke those reassuring words that were meant to calm the nerves of ground control, a subtle, gnawing unease crept into his gut like a cold shadow, the kind that seasoned pilots feel in their bones. A premonition of impending trouble lurking just beyond the instrument's glowing, deceptive calm. A whisper of doom that heightened the emotional stakes to unbearable levels, stirring a quiet dread that clawed at the edges of his composure and made every second feel like an eternity. At 45 kilometers altitude, the fuel in the first stage finally depleted after burning with furious intensity that illuminated the sky like a man-made sun. The engines cutting off with a sudden, jarring halt that plunged them into a brief, stomach-lurching weightlessness after the hellish compression of launch. A sensation like being abruptly freed from heavy chains only to float helplessly in a brief, disorienting void that played tricks on the mind and body, evoking a momentary sense of freedom, tinged with vulnerability and the emotional rush of relief mixed with anticipation. Experiencing weightlessness now, Afshanin noted, his words carrying the quiet relief of passing yet another critical milestone in this high-stakes journey, a moment of fleeting peace amid the storm of forces at play, his thoughts briefly drifting to the joy of sharing this with his children someday. But then came the pivotal separation sequence. The 4 side boosters were supposed to detach cleanly with a series of precisely timed explosive bolts, 4 muffled pops signaling flawless execution and steady progress toward the embrace of orbit, a step that represented years of engineering precision. Instead, a glaring red warning light flared on the control panel like a harbinger of doom, its ominous glow casting an eerie, blood-red hue over their faces and instruments. Abnormal separation detected. The automation's voice intoned coldly and mechanically, sending a sharp spike of adrenaline surging through both men's veins, their hearts racing with the sudden, gut-wrenching realization that something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong in the intricate dance of machinery, the emotional impact hitting like a punch to the soul. "What's happening up there? Report detailed status?" Afshanin demanded urgently into the microphone, his calm facade cracking for the first time as internal alarm bells rang deafeningly in his mind, the fear of the unknown gripping him like a vice that squeezed his chest tighter than the G-forces ever could, evoking a wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm his training. Down in the bustling, high-tension mission control center, a hive of glowing screens, clacking keyboards, and anxious faces etched with concentration, engineers and controllers stared at their flickering displays in horrified, wide-eyed disbelief, hearts sinking into pits of despair and helplessness as the real-time telemetry data painted a vivid, nightmarish scenario unfolding in agonizing detail. One of the side boosters had failed to detach fully due to a critical sensor malfunction that had evaded detection, its massive, unwieldy form, 50 tons of unyielding metal and lingering residual fuel, clinging precariously like a deadly parasite that threatened to doom the entire mission with its unbalanced weight and potential for disaster. The rocket began to spin wildly out of control, the unbalanced force transforming the smooth, majestic ascent into a chaotic, terrifying whirl on the very edge of space, where the thin air offered no forgiveness or stability, the motion evoking a profound sense of disorientation and fear that clawed at the mind. Afshanin was slammed violently against the left bulkhead with jarring force that sent pain shooting through his body, the centrifugal forces building with terrifying, exponential speed, pressing him with bone-crushing intensity that made breathing a torturous effort and thinking clearly an almost impossible feat amid the disorientation and noise. Instead of soaring upward toward the stars in triumphant glory, they were trapped in a deadly rotation, the world outside the porthole blurring into a nauseating vortex of sky, clouds, and horizon that evoked a profound sense of helplessness and terror, the emotional weight of failure crashing down like relentless waves, stirring thoughts of family and regret. "Carrier failure detected. Initiating emergency protocols now," Afshanin shouted into the microphone, his voice tight with urgency, fear, and the raw instinct to survive against all odds, the words echoing the overwhelming terror gripping his chest as the mission spiraled into catastrophe, evoking a deep, primal fear that clawed at the soul and tested the bonds of brotherhood. The stubborn side booster finally tore free from its moorings, but not with the clean, precise separation envisioned by the engineers who had poured their lives into the design. Instead, it slammed into the central core with catastrophic, earth-shaking force that reverberated through the structure, ripping a jagged 2-meter gash in the hull like a mortal wound torn in the side of a mighty beast, exposing the innards to the void in a moment of horrifying vulnerability. Liquid oxygen, supercooled to a bone-numbing minus 180 degrees Celsius, erupted into the near vacuum with explosive violence, a white plume of freezing death that crystallized everything it touched in an instant of surreal, deadly beauty and horror that sent shivers through anyone who later reviewed the footage, the sight evoking a profound sense of awe mixed with dread. The main engine, starved of its vital oxidizer in a matter of seconds, faltered and died with a stuttering cough that echoed the mission's failing heartbeat, thrust plummeting to zero as the rocket lost all control, its majestic purpose reduced to a tumbling, doomed wreck hurtling through the sky with tragic inevitability. The leaking oxygen only accelerated the insane spin, the craft twisting and careening like a deflating balloon released wildly into the wind, hurtling the crew toward inevitable disaster with a force that evoked screams of primal fear locked deep in their throats, the emotional turmoil of impending doom washing over them in waves of despair, regret for unspoken words to loved ones, and the fierce will to fight back. Onboard computers, cold, analytical, and unfeeling in their precision, processed hundreds of parameters in mere milliseconds, the verdict flashing mercilessly across the flickering screens with finality. Flight continuation impossible. Abort immediately or face certain annihilation in a blaze of glory turned to tragedy. SAS activation initiated. SAS, blared the automated warning system, its mechanical voice a lifeline piercing the chaos as it triggered the emergency escape sequence in a desperate, last-ditch bid for survival that hung by the thinnest thread of hope amid the storm of failure, evoking a surge of hope mixed with terror. Their once trusted home had transformed in an instant into a flying bomb at 50 kilometers altitude, a ticking inferno where every passing second ticked relentlessly against the void's unforgiving clock, the emotional weight of potential loss, families torn apart in grief, futures erased in an instant, unfulfilled dreams scattered like debris, crashing down on them like the G-forces themselves, stirring a profound ache of what-ifs and regrets that pierced the heart. The Soyuz abort system, SAS, was their sole, fragile lifeline in this nightmare. A solid-fuel rocket mounted atop the capsule, meticulously engineered to yank the descent module free from the exploding booster in a violent ejection that mimicked a fighter pilot's ejection seat on steroids, a last resort born from decades of hard-learned lessons in spaceflight's dangers and the emotional toll of past losses. But the SAS thrust was a mere 7.5 tons, pitiful and inadequate against the centrifugal force from the spin that crushed them with 30 tons of relentless, bone-grinding pressure. A mathematical mismatch that screamed impossibility, evoking a wave of despair and resignation as the laws of physics turned against them with brutal, impartial cruelty that felt almost personal in its harshness. The explosion overhead roared like 1,000 firecrackers detonating in deafening unison, the SAS igniting with a violent, earth-shattering jolt that spiked the G-forces from 0 to 6 in the blink of an eye, a sudden shift that left them gasping for air and fighting blackness. 300 kilograms bore down on Ovshinin's chest like an invisible giant's fist squeezing the life from him. 470 on Haig's broader frame, blood draining rapidly from their brains in a dizzying rush, vision tunneling into dark, narrowing spots as they fought desperately to stay conscious against the black encroaching on their sight, their breaths coming in ragged, painful gasps that echoed the primal struggle for life amid the mechanical symphony of failure, the emotional strain pushing them to the brink of breakdown. They were ripped free from the doomed rocket like a bullet exploding from a gun barrel with explosive force, their velocity relative to Earth a blistering 1,900 meters per second, altitude locked at 50 kilometers in the thin, freezing upper atmosphere where survival hung by a thread of engineering and luck. Behind them, the dying rocket tumbled chaotically in the rarefied air, leaving a tragic, heartbreaking trail of vapor, flames, and fragmented debris. A 700-ton behemoth disintegrating in slow-motion agony, its destruction a poignant, soul-stirring symbol of human hubris clashing against the cosmos's indifference, evoking waves of sorrow for the dreams it carried now scattered to the winds The sight from afar, like a falling star that carried wishes, turned to ashes. The SAS burned fiercely for its allotted 15 seconds, a brief but critical burst of salvation that felt like an eternity of strain, and then detached with a final, shuddering release that jarred their bodies, leaving the 2.5-ton descent module hurtling along a ballistic trajectory like a cannonball fired recklessly into the heavens, its path a parabolic arc of fate that evoked a mix of awe and terror in those monitoring from below, their hearts in their throats. At 50 kilometers, they had pierced the stratosphere. Air so thin it was nearly a vacuum, the sky shifting from the familiar, comforting blue to a deep, ominous violet that faded ominously to the inky black of space. A sight that evoked a profound sense of isolation, vulnerability, and the humbling vastness of the universe that made human endeavors seem small and fragile. The sudden return to weightlessness after the crushing 6GS made their stomachs lurch violently, vestibular systems screaming in confusion as concepts of up and down dissolved into a disorienting vortex, leaving them floating in a sensory void that amplified the emotional turmoil of survival's razor edge, the fear of what came next gripping their hearts like cold steel, stirring thoughts of family and the life they nearly lost. Moscow, we're okay. Systems are holding steady for now, Ovchinin reported into the void, his voice strained but resolute with the determination of a survivor, clinging to the lifeline of protocol amid the swirling chaos. His words a desperate anchor to ground control's distant, reassuring voices that represented the thread connecting them to safety, home, and the world they longed to return to, the capsule, their container, as they affectionately called it in the insider jargon of spacefarers, was miraculously intact against all odds, a spherical haven measuring just 2.5 meters in diameter, its thin walls of only 2.5 centimeters standing as the sole, fragile barrier separating them from the instant, horrific death awaiting in the freezing vacuum outside, a testament to engineering genius under duress that evoked profound gratitude amid the fear. The temperature beyond the hull plummeted to a bone-numbing minus 70 degrees Celsius, the pressure 1,000 times less than on Earth's surface. One tiny crack in the structure, one failure in the seals, and their blood would boil in their veins, expanding in agonizing bubbles that would end their lives in seconds of unimaginable pain and horror, a fate that sent shivers of primal terror through even the most trained and stoic minds, evoking a deep empathy for their plight and the emotional toll of such proximity to death. Understood, Alexei. How's Nick holding up? Vitals stable on our end? Ground control responded, their voices crackling with barely concealed anxiety, relief, and the emotional strain of guiding men through the jaws of death, the bond between crew and ground a lifeline of human connection in the isolation of space that stirred feelings of solidarity and shared purpose. Haig attempted to turn his head toward his commander, the simple motion feeling alien and awkward in the zero-gravity environment, where muscles conditioned to Earth's constant pull rebelled against the sudden absence, leaving him disoriented and nauseous. "I'm good, still in one piece, breathing steady," he rasped in English, his voice trembling with the raw, lingering aftershock of their near-death brush, but alive, miraculously, defiantly alive against all odds, a testament to human engineering, training, and sheer willpower that stirred profound gratitude and awe, his thoughts drifting to his children's faces for strength. But good was a relative term in this nightmare scenario, a fragile veneer over the underlying terror that could shatter at any moment like glass under pressure. They had been transformed in an instant from astronauts on a noble mission to mere projectiles, soaring at nearly 2 kilometers per second through an environment where a human without protection would succumb in half a minute to the vacuum's deadly embrace. Lungs collapsing in agony as air rushed out, fluids boiling within the body in bubbling torment, consciousness fading in a haze of excruciating pain and darkness that evoked the ultimate horror of dying alone in the void, separated from all that is familiar and loved. The instruments flickered erratically under the strain of the abort, showing altitude continuing to climb. 55 kilometers, 60, 70, each meter gained a bittersweet victory on the back of inertia, but also a harbinger that the impending fall would be even more brutal, more unforgiving, evoking a profound sense of dread as gravity prepared to reclaim its due with vengeance, the emotional weight of the descent building like a storm on the horizon, stirring fears of re-entry gone wrong. The descent began with gravity's inexorable pull asserting itself once more, the capsule flipping end over end in an uncontrolled, stomach-churning re-entry that sent waves of nausea crashing through their bodies like tidal surges. The heat shields initially facing the wrong direction in a terrifying misalignment that exposed vulnerable parts to the friction of the thickening atmosphere, building to infernal temperatures capable of melting steel in seconds of blazing fury that evoked images of hell itself. Afshanin and Haig braced themselves for the impending inferno with gritted teeth, their bodies slamming against the restraints with jarring force as G-forces returned with a vengeance, peaking at a crushing 7 gs. A weight of 700 kilograms bearing down on Afshanin's chest like an unrelenting press that made every breath a battle for survival, vision blurring into gray tunnels of darkness, lungs struggling desperately for every precious inhale in the fiery, shaking plunge that tested their physical and mental limits to the breaking point, stirring emotions of raw determination and the fear of blacking out at the critical moment. The module stabilized by sheer chance or perhaps a touch of divine intervention amid the chaos, the heat shield finally swinging forward to take the brunt of the re-entry hell, ablating in a spectacular blaze of plasma that lit the sky like a shooting star fallen from grace in tragic beauty, the cabin interior heating to unbearable, sweat-drenched levels that made their skins prickle with discomfort and fear of structural failure as they endured the hellish ride. Hearts pounding with the raw, primal fear that this could be their final moments, the emotional turmoil of leaving their children fatherless crashing over them like relentless waves in a storm of regret, prayer, and resolve to hold on. Below, on the vast, windswept Kazakh steppe that stretched endlessly under the sun like a golden sea, 700 tons of doomed wreckage rained down in an apocalyptic hail that evoked biblical plagues of fire and brimstone. Booster fragments plummeting like meteorites from the heavens with whistling screams, fuel tanks exploding on impact with ground-shaking booms that ignited brush fires and scattered debris over a staggering 30 kilometers. A scene of utter destruction that stirred profound sorrow and awe for the ground teams witnessing the fallout of human ambition gone awry, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what could have been lost forever, the emotional impact rippling through families and nations. Mission Control watched in agonized horror, their screens filled with telemetry data tracking the capsule's erratic, terrifying descent, prayers whispered under breaths for the parachutes to deploy flawlessly amid the chaos. The room thick with tension, sweat, and the shared emotional strain of helplessness. At 7 kilometers altitude, the drogue chute fired with a sharp, reassuring crack that cut through the tension like a knife, stabilizing the wild spin with a jolt, followed moments later by the main canopy blossoming like a life-saving flower unfurling in the wind with graceful urgency, jerking them upward with 4 gs that rattled teeth, jarred bones, and tested every strap and seam in the capsule with violent force that evoked winces of pain. They slammed into the ground with bone-jarring impact, the force sending shockwaves through their bodies like a hammer strike from the gods, dust billowing around the smoking capsule like a shroud finally lifted from a long, torturous nightmare. The emotional release of survival washing over them in overwhelming waves of dizzying relief, gratitude, and the lingering shadow of what could have been their end, stirring tears of joy, exhaustion, and profound thankfulness for the gift of life. Renewed, search and recovery teams arrived in mere minutes, helicopter rotors chopping the air with urgent, life-saving rhythm as they descended like angels of mercy upon the crash site, their faces etched with relief and admiration. Afshanin and Haig were carefully, tenderly extracted from the capsule, dazed and disoriented but remarkably intact. No major injuries beyond deep, painful bruises that throbbed with every movement, minor strains that pulled at muscles, and the invisible psychological scars of staring into the abyss of death and emerging unscathed, their bodies and minds forever marked by the ordeal that had tested them to their core. "We're okay. Mission aborted, but we're safe and sound, alive thanks to the system," Afshanin repeated to the rescuers who swarmed around them with medical kits and supportive hands, his voice hoarse with exhaustion, emotion, and the raw edge of survival, but his eyes reflecting the profound trauma of those endless, terrifying seconds suspended between life and oblivion. A trauma that would linger in quiet moments for years to come, evoking flashbacks and a deeper appreciation for every breath. The exhaustive, meticulous investigation that followed, involving experts from around the world poring over mountains of data, recovered wreckage, and eyewitness testimonies with painstaking detail, revealed a faulty sensor in the booster separation mechanism, a rare, insidious manufacturing defect that had evaded even the most rigorous pre-launch inspections and quality checks, causing the catastrophic malfunction that led to the uncontrolled spin and explosive failure, a sobering reminder of how even the most advanced technology can falter under the pressures of reality and human error, stirring reflections on the need for constant vigilance. But for Afshanin and Haig, the incident was far more than a technical glitch or a line in a dry report. It was a brush with mortality that tested their souls to the breaking point, evoking profound gratitude for their survival, a deeper, more poignant appreciation for life's fleeting preciousness, and an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of shared adversity that transcended nationalities, languages, and backgrounds, a bond that would endure through time. Months later, undeterred by the trauma that could have shattered lesser men into fragments of doubt, fear, and resignation, they returned to the stars on March 14, 2019, aboard the same type of Soyuz rocket that had nearly claimed their lives in a blaze of failure. Their hearts heavy with the vivid, haunting memories of that fateful day, but their spirits unbowed, resilient, and burning with a fierce determination to conquer the fear that had nearly consumed them, proving to themselves and the world that true courage lies in facing the abyss again. The pre-launch rituals took on a deeper, more profound emotional weight. Final, tearful hugs with children whose eyes brimmed with worry and unspoken pleas for safety. Whispered promises to return safe and sound no matter what. The quiet fear of recurrence gnawing at their minds like a persistent shadow that stirred waves of anxiety they pushed down with iron will and mutual support. Liftoff was flawless, the engines roaring with controlled, triumphant power that echoed their inner strength and resolve. The separation executing perfectly without a hitch or whisper of trouble, and they soared into orbit with a sense of redemption that washed over them like a cleansing wave, docking successfully with the International Space Station 2 days later, closing the dark, haunting chapter of their nightmare with a triumphant return to the cosmos that filled them with a profound sense of renewal, purpose, and the joy of second chances. After 6 months in the weightless embrace of space, conducting groundbreaking experiments that pushed the boundaries of scientific knowledge and human understanding, performing daring spacewalks that evoked awe and wonder at the breathtaking beauty of Earth from above. A blue marble suspended in the blackness, their hearts swelling with emotion at the sight, and maintaining the station with the precision and dedication of true artisans who treated every task as a labor of love. They prepared for re-entry with a mix of excitement, nostalgia, and trepidation for leaving the stars behind. On October 3, 2019, exactly 1 year after their brush with death, a date etched in their minds like a scar that reminded them of mortality, the descent module of Soyuz MS-12 touched down softly in the Kazakh steppe, in the very same region where they had nearly frozen in the cold grip of survival's harsh reality, the landing a poetic bookend to their journey. But this time, everything unfolded by the book. A daytime landing under warm, welcoming skies that bathed the landscape in golden light, search teams waiting with open arms, cheers of joy, and the emotional release of completion. Landing complete, crew status excellent, mission accomplished, Afshanin reported, his voice steady with the joy of success and the emotional release of closure that brought tears to his eyes. The crew emerged from the capsule feeling excellent, stepping out into the brilliant sunlight as heroes welcomed home with fanfare, admiration, and the overwhelming embrace of loved ones. Their story a beacon of perseverance that inspired the world with its message of hope. Helicopters whisked them away to Moscow, where emotional, tear-jerking reunions with families awaited, tears of overwhelming relief streaming down faces in rivers of joy, tight embraces that spoke volumes of love's enduring power through trials, press conferences buzzing with global admiration and questions, and prestigious awards honoring their unparalleled courage, resilience, and the human spirit's triumph over adversity. It was the standard hero's welcome for those who had conquered the stars, but for them, the true reward lay in overcoming the fear, doubt, and trauma that had nearly broken them, proving that setbacks are merely stepping stones to greater heights, stirring profound inspiration in all who heard their tale and evoking emotions of pride, gratitude, and the beauty of second chances. In the years that followed, Afshanin became a revered instructor at the Cosmonaut Training Center, passing on his hard-won wisdom, experiences, and lessons learned to the next generation of spacefarers with a passion born from the fires of adversity. His lessons infused with the emotional depth of someone who had danced with death and lived to tell the tale. The main rule of survival in space? He asks his wide-eyed trainees, his eyes reflecting the depth of his journey, the scars it left, and the growth it fostered. Never give up, no matter how dark the void or how insurmountable the odds. They chorus back, inspired by his story of grit and determination. Correct, and never, ever leave your comrades behind. We're all in this vast journey together, bound by the threads of humanity. Haig returned to the U.S., mentoring aspiring astronauts at NASA with the same fervor and dedication. His story becoming a legendary tale of perseverance, grit, and the power of resilience that motivates all who hear it. A reminder that even in the face of failure's crushing weight, there is strength to be found in rising again. They meet annually at international space conferences. Two men forever linked by a shared ordeal that tested their limits, forged an unbreakable bond of brotherhood, and transformed them into symbols of human endurance. Their conversations laced with the quiet understanding of survivors who have seen the edge and stepped back. Any regrets about that fateful night in the steppe, the cold that nearly claimed us? Haig asks, his voice tinged with the emotion of reflection and the warmth of friendship. None at all. Afshanin replies with a warm, knowing smile that speaks of growth, healing, and the wisdom gained from adversity. It made us stronger, unbreakable in ways we never imagined, ready to face whatever the cosmos throws next. Like if this epic, soul-stirring tale of human resilience against the cosmos moves you deeply, evoking tears of empathy, admiration, and inspiration. Comment below. Could you face such a life-altering trial and emerge victorious, stronger than before? Or would the fear consume you? Share your raw, heartfelt emotions about the power of the human spirit that defies even the stars themselves, rising from the ashes of near death to touch the heavens once more. A story that reminds us all of our own potential for greatness in the face of adversity. To expand even further, let's delve deeper into the backstory of these remarkable men. Alexei Ovshanin was born in a small Russian town, where the vast skies ignited his passion for flight from a young age, leading him through rigorous military training that tested his physical and mental limits, forging a man of steel resolve. His first spaceflight had been a success, but it came with its own emotional challenges. Long months away from his children, missing milestones like birthdays and school events that tugged at his heart with guilt and longing. Nick Haig, growing up in the American Midwest, dreamed of the stars while gazing at night skies, his military career honing skills in high-pressure situations, but nothing prepared him for the emotional roller coaster of his maiden voyage turned disaster. Their families endured sleepless nights, the wives holding back tears while reassuring children that Daddy will be home soon. The emotional strain a silent battle on the home front. The investigation's details revealed layers of human error and mechanical oversight, stirring debates on safety protocols that evoked frustration and calls for change in the space community. The return mission's preparation was fraught with emotional hurdles, psychological evaluations to ensure they weren't haunted by PTSD, family counseling to address fears, and the quiet moments of doubt where they questioned if pushing forward was worth the risk. Yet, their triumph inspired global audiences, evoking pride in international cooperation between Russia and the U.S., a beacon of unity in divided times.